Imagine you're living 100 years ago. There's no bottled water, very few home filters, and clean water is a daily worry. But then someone tells you, just toss a tea bag and a chunk of iron in your water jug, and you'll have a fresh filtered drink. Sounds bizarre, right? But in the 1920s, this odd tea and iron trick changed how thousands of families around the world purified water. Using nothing but kitchen scraps and the power of simple chemistry, how did such a strange idea catch on, and does it actually work? Let's dive into the forgotten science and economics of the tea bag and iron water filter. Welcome back to Boring Economic Update, where we explore the strange and surprising ways economics shapes the everyday. And if you like learning about these forgotten tricks and stories, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Every week, we dig up a peculiarity from economic history that might just change the way you see the world today. Now let's stick with this story, because the trick that people stumbled on in their kitchens wasn't just about taste or looks, it was about life and death. In the United States and Europe around the 1920s, waterborne diseases were still a real threat. Cities were improving their waterworks, sure, but smaller towns and rural homes didn't have the luxury of municipal filtration. Most water sources were suspect, especially after heavy rain or in the heat of summer. People boiled their water when they could, but fuel wasn't always cheap or available, and so curiosity and necessity combined in the most ordinary places, the kitchen and the tool shed. The legend goes like this. Somewhere in England, maybe in the grey outskirts of Birmingham or in a smoky tenement in Boston, a thrifty housewife remembered seeing rust in the old water troughs and noticed that the water seemed clearer where old bits of metal were left to sit. Around the same time, a schoolchild's science lesson about iron's powers got mixed up with the growing popularity of tea bags, those little pouches of cheap black tea that had only just begun to replace loose-leaf tea. Some neighbor or cousin decided to experiment. Why not put a used tea bag and a rusty nail in a jug of river water overnight? What harm could it do? So they did. Sometimes you need to imagine the scene. An enamel pitcher on a rickety wooden table, bits of grit at the bottom, water cloudy and yellowed, the faint smell of iron shavings in the air. The next day, the water looked clearer. The taste? A bit metallic, but not bitter. Over a few weeks, other households started copying the trick. In some neighborhoods, it became a sort of folk practice, sometimes praised, sometimes doubted, but always talked about. Word spread quickly in that pre-internet age, through church bulletins, union halls, family letters, even comic strips and health pamphlets. But why would this strange combination work at all? It turns out that both materials, old tea bags and iron filings or nails, do something useful to dirty water, especially the kind people were drinking in the early 20th century. Tea, particularly after steeping, contains tannins. These are natural compounds found in a lot of plants, but in tea they're especially concentrated. Tannins are known to bind with heavy metals and some bacteria, which is why tea stains your teacup brown and sometimes makes water taste funny. Iron, if it's a little rusty, actually starts a chemical reaction in the water. When iron oxidizes, that's the rust you see, it releases tiny particles that attract certain contaminants and make them clump together. This process, called flocculation, is a basic step in modern water treatment too, though it usually involves different chemicals. In a poor household in 1925, you might not have understood the science, but you saw the result. A jug left overnight would have particles stuck to the tea bag and a clear line of reddish silt near the iron. The water above, if carefully poured off, looked better and tasted cleaner. Of course, it didn't remove every germ, nothing is perfect, but people quickly learned it was far safer than nothing. And when you have no gas to boil water, or you're too broke to buy the luxury of a store-bought filter, this was an answer that relied on scraps you'd otherwise throw away. For a generation still recovering from war and pandemic, that mattered. It might surprise you, but as radios and magazines picked up tales of kitchen science, universities started paying attention too. Was this a local fluke or something global? Laboratory studies from the time found the iron and tea trick didn't remove everything the way modern filters do, but it cut down on bacteria and made muddy water much more palatable. Advice columns started to recommend at least keeping a clean tea bag and chunk of iron around, just in case. It was DIY science at its most practical, and maybe just a little bit magical. But the economic story running in the background is just as fascinating, and the way this hack spread tells us a lot about how everyday people share survival knowledge. In towns where water treatment was years away, people took comfort in small rituals. It wasn't just about purifying water, it was about finding control in a world that often felt unsafe. Filtering water with tea and iron didn't cost any extra money either. It was the ultimate in recycling, something that made sense in an era where every penny counted. Now, stay with me, because the tale of the tea bag and iron water filter goes deeper than backyard kitchen chemistry. Why did some communities trust it and others didn't? What made authorities finally pay attention? And how did this simple hack influence the giant water purification industry that would come after? Let's explore why the world needed this trick, and what happened when people started demanding better water for everyone. As this tea bag and iron trick made its quiet rounds through kitchens and workshops, a sort of underground network for survival advice came to life. You can picture it in a neighborhood barbershop. Someone would mention their filtered water trick, and the barber, half listening while trimming, would pass it along to the next person in the chair. School teachers started using it as a science lesson in home economics classes, earning knowing nods from students whose families were already using the trick. There was a desperate hope and just a little pride attached to having figured out a way to beat dirty water with leftovers and odds and ends. The knowledge spread, but so did the questions. How much iron does it take? How long does the tea bag have to sit? Should you use green tea or black? And do you need a special kind of nail? The real genius of this method was its pure accessibility. It didn't matter if you were rich or poor, city dweller or farmer. You didn't need connections, equipment, or expert opinions. All you needed was yesterday's tea and a spare nail from the toolbox. And although it wasn't perfect, let's be clear, no one claimed it could match what filtered through a city's state-of-the-art sand and carbon purification system. It was remarkable how good the results were for basic survival needs. This put power back in the hands of ordinary people. In a time where many felt powerless against economic hardship and public health crises, that mattered. It's worth remembering what the backdrop was in the 1920s. After the devastation of World War I and the Spanish flu, trust in big government solutions was shaky. Many families simply couldn't afford to wait for a city engineer or a wealthy benefactor to deliver safe water to their neighborhood. Small towns still relied on wells, rainwater barrels, and rivers, none of which came with guarantees. The price of coal or wood to boil water was high, especially during fuel strikes or economic downturns. People looked for answers wherever they could, even if those answers looked strange or untested. The tea and iron hack worked because it fit the era. Easy, cheap, repeatable, and if you got it wrong, you'd just start over with new scraps. Through the late 1920s, clever entrepreneurs and tinkerers started to see a bigger opportunity here. While some families were satisfied with the old jug method, others wondered if this trick could be scaled up, maybe even sold. Small metalworking shops began soldering together filter canisters from scrap iron mesh, marketed as deluxe kitchen gadgets. Local pamphlets promised that for a few cents, you could buy the last water filter you'd ever need. The only refills required? More tea. Everyone had that. These businesses were microcosms of something essential about the economic moment. Scarcity was just another word for invention. But there was another side to the story. Scientists and public health officials grew curious and then concerned. Would this homebrew filter give people false confidence? Was the tea bag strong enough to hold back disease-causing bacteria? Or was the iron enough to remove lead and other dangerous metals? Local governments, facing lawsuits and outbreaks, started to worry that a cheap kitchen hack might backfire if people stopped boiling water or demanding city improvements. There were serious debates. Some early public health pamphlets, especially in American cities with immigrant populations, condemned the use of improvised filters as unsafe. Others, from budget-strapped towns or rural clinics, praised the innovation, calling it the housewife's shield against dysentery. It was never black and white. So, where did the tea and iron trick actually show up? While its biggest adherents were in working-class neighborhoods, especially those with a lot of British or Irish immigrants, it also found its way onto farms in the Midwest, mining camps in the Rockies, and even small towns in India and Africa, wherever black tea was cheap and iron was handy. An American Red Cross report from the late 1920s, for example, mentioned the potential of tea bag iron filtering during disaster relief operations, especially when sanitation was limited and resources thin. The trick really was global in scope, powered by the unique forces of colonial trade. Tea from Asia, iron from Europe and the Americas. But the world was changing, fast. With the Great Depression looming, city budgets were slashed and public health officers grew frustrated at having their hands tied. Some city engineers took interest in the trick for their own reasons. If a kitchen jug could make water safer, could big water plants use similar chemistry but on a giant scale? Researchers started running controlled experiments, dipping iron rods and different teas into contaminated water and keeping detailed notes. It turned out the science wasn't just kitchen folklore. The iron acted as a sacrificial anode, attracting acids and impurities, while the tea's tannins helped create clumps that slowly settled to the bottom, making it easy to decant the clear water above. In places without better options, this was downright revolutionary. But not everything could be fixed with a tea bag and iron. This trick never fully removed all harmful bacteria, especially more stubborn forms like cholera or typhoid. And while tannins could bind with some metals, they couldn't tackle every contaminant lurking in industrialized water supplies. Some health officials ran their own experiments and found that the method worked best as a stopgap, not a replacement for safe water pipes, but a solid backup when the pipes ran dry or when the pumps broke. The real benefit, though, was psychological as much as physical. People felt less helpless, more in control, knowing that fixing a deadly problem might be as simple as rooting through the pantry. At the same time, this era saw a revolution in how people thought about health, cleanliness, and technology. The idea that you could science your way out of daily problems, using the resources you had, not just what you could buy, fit right into the growing faith in personal ingenuity. Magazines like Popular Mechanics and Ladies' Home Journal began picking up on these types of household tricks. Even if many readers never tried the iron and tea bag experiment themselves, the story stuck. Sometimes what you need is already at hand. What's maybe most compelling is how this hack, passed on through working class families, kitchen tables, and emergency shelters, eventually caught the attention of the burgeoning water filtration industry. By the late 1930s, as new plastics and synthetic fibers came onto the market, companies looked for ways to mass produce home water filters that captured the same low-cost, do-it-yourself vibe. Strangely, the bare-bones chemistry of the tea and iron filter influenced the early designs of carbon block filters and pitcher systems that would eventually land in kitchens everywhere. But let's not lose sight of the people behind this story, those who had no choice but to solve a deadly problem with whatever they could find. The persistence of the tea bag and iron trick wasn't just an accident or trend, it was a matter of survival, a testament to everyday economic creativity, and a reminder that sometimes the best solutions come from outside the spotlight. So the real mystery remains. Why, even as the world advanced, did we keep searching for water filters made from the everyday and the ordinary? Maybe it's because no matter how high-tech we get, there's comfort in knowing that even a simple tea bag and an old nail might just save the day. As we bring the story to its conclusion, you have to picture the bigger ripples stretching out from those first brave households with their stained pitchers and lifeline tea bags. By the late 1930s, water was fast becoming both an everyday expectation and a battleground between public health, industry, and the kitchen table inventors, trying to stay one step ahead of the next outbreak. The tea bag and iron trick started to fade into the background, but not because it was completely forgotten, rather because its basic logic had been quietly absorbed into a new era of product design and municipal strategy. If you walked into a store in the 1940s or 50s, you'd see ads for fancy new filters promising pure water, safely at home, often modeled on the very principles ordinary people had worked out with their own hands a decade earlier. Instead of a used tea bag, these new products often contained activated carbon or synthetic resins, scientifically tweaked to do what tannins in tea had done, but better. The old iron nail became a replaceable rod or mesh designed to corrode in controlled ways, refining the crude chemistry of the kitchen into reliable technology. Each iteration promised more: cleaner, safer water at the turn of a tap, no boiling, and no homemade jugs on the counter. But the spirit behind the tea and iron filter did not vanish. In fact, each step forward was powered by the same drive for practical, affordable, do-it-yourself solutions to basic needs. When consumer demand grew louder, when people told companies and city councils that we want safer water now, the old household hack was never far from memory. Advertisers played on that homespun confidence. Scientists studied the way tannins or oxidized metals could be adapted and improved. Even emergency water purification tablets used by soldiers in World War II owed something to the humble traditions started in home kitchens and makeshift rural labs where necessity and chance often led the way. Economic thinkers began to see the water filter story as a microcosm of something bigger. How, faced with scarcity or danger, tight-knit communities could crowdsource innovation. In fact, historians now look back at the humble tea bag and iron filter as an early example of distributed problem-solving, the very foundation of how today's open-source solutions and citizen science efforts work. Everyday people, responding to gaps left by government or the market, pooled their knowledge until they figured out a passable fix. It's a story that might sound old-fashioned, but one we keep repeating in different forms every time crisis strikes or economic times get tough. Globally, the tradition of making do with local resources hasn't gone anywhere. From Bangladesh to Brazil, rural communities sometimes still use plant-based coagulants or metal scraps, not just because they're cheap, but because local expertise knows what works in a pinch. When disaster strikes, a hurricane toppling water lines or a flood contaminating wells, the same principles still apply. How do we use what we have right now to get safe drinking water for our families? Nonprofits and aid workers around the world often make use of simple cloths, iron bits, or plant seeds, echoing the spirit of those 1920s kitchens. It's one of those rare moments in history where simple economics, the need to stretch a budget, meets chemistry and social ingenuity. But let's not oversell the results. As modern science kept improving, we learned a lot more about water safety than anyone in the 1920s could have imagined. Critical advances in understanding viruses, chemical toxins, and complex pollutants showed the limits of the tea bag and iron approach. What was once a miracle for turning muddy river water into something drinkable eventually had to be supplemented or replaced by more thorough, tested solutions. Municipal plants adopted flocculation and filtration on an industrial scale, using chemicals and machinery that could handle the demands of growing urban populations. Yet, even the best city water is still filtered in spirit by millions of tiny lessons passed from mothers to daughters, neighbors to neighbors, right back to those improvised kitchen efforts. The real lesson here isn't about nostalgia or making do with less, or even about science, though the chemistry is fascinating. It's about how communities, rather than waiting for a distant solution, pushed for something better, using whatever tools were at hand. The economic history of the tea bag and iron trick is a reminder that progress doesn't just trickle down from boardrooms or laboratories. It bubbles up, slowly, from the pots and pans and kitchen tables of ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. Today, even as we drink filtered water from sleek pitchers or high-tech faucets, the legacy of cheap home innovation lingers. The same pattern repeats with every new global crisis. COVID-19 led to homemade face shields and crowd-sourced sanitizers, and supply chain problems sent people back to DIY repairs and community swaps. We still depend on each other for clever, practical solutions. They just look a little different from the rusty nails and scraps of tea leaves of a century ago. So next time you brew a cup of tea or toss out an old nail, think about the generations of experimenters who refused to let scarcity be the last word. They wrung answers from leftovers and found hope in simple chemistry, sometimes enough to keep a whole family safe, if only for a day longer. That's not just clever economics, it's the heart of economic history itself, showing how human creativity and necessity never go out of style. If you've enjoyed this forgotten tale of everyday innovation, and you've got a kitchen table trick of your own or a family story about making do, I want to hear from you. Drop your comments below, and let's swap stories about economic creativity and survival hacks your grandparents passed down. And if you think others might enjoy this odd journey from tea bags to tap water, hit share to spread the word. For more overlooked tales like this, remember to subscribe. Because here at Boring Economic Update, the economics might be boring, but the stories behind them are anything but. See you in the next one.